Hello, this is Richard Thornton. Welcome to part two of the People of One Fire series on the concealed history of the Appalachian Mountains. In this section, we will talk about the Spanish, French, Jewish, and English explorers who went through the southern mountains during the early colonial period. Their discoveries were reflected on maps, but today much of the information has been concealed or distorted. Long, long ago, in a land far away, I was director of the Asheville-Buncombe County, North Carolina Historic Resources Commission. Prior to that, for 4 years, I'd been director of the planning and design for the Downtown Revitalization Program. The next phase, of course, was helping the property owners restore their buildings, so I was a very busy boy. Then I got a letter from the city manager telling me that I had to meet with some anthropology and historic history professors to discuss Hernando de Soto and Juan Pardo. I vaguely knew who Hernando de Soto was. I had no clue who Pardo was, and I really didn't care. I'd had a very heavy background both in undergraduate and graduate school in architectural history and urban history, but we never discussed what happened in the interior of the United States during the early colonial period, but I had to obey orders. I realized that I need to get back up on this one, so I asked two archaeologists employed by the state of North Carolina to sit in with me to answer questions, because a lot of this was just not in my realm of concern. You'll know these professors' names that we won't mention for obvious reasons. They showed up with highway map with masking tape on it, which was their proposed route for Hernando de Soto. I asked them where the topographic maps were, and they weren't really sure what a topographic map was. They obviously had no clue about the terrain of the western mountains. I also noticed that although they presented themselves as being experts on Spanish history, none of them could pronounce Spanish words correctly, much less speak Spanish. But at any rate, they informed me where they thought Hernando de Soto went, that he came through Asheville and then explored all through western North Carolina. That he might have been in North Carolina, he probably was, but as we quickly informed him, there were no Native American towns occupied on the French Broad River during the mid 1500s when Senor de Soto and Senor Pardo were traversing the southeast. So they could have never come through the French Broad Valley, and they were not in Asheville. We also told the professors that where they said was a Cherokee town named Quetzuli, which was visited by De Soto, was actually a woodland mound that had been abandoned probably for about 1,000 years when De Soto came through. But that afternoon, they gave a press conference informing the public that state and local officials who specialized in archaeology and historic preservation had concurred completely with their proposed route for De Soto. I had learned a lesson about professors. Don't necessarily believe what they say. I wrote a memo to Mr. Michaelov, our city manager, and told him that they had totally misrepresented our meeting, and he did nothing. Meanwhile, the Asheville Chamber of Commerce embarked on a major marketing program that lasted for well over a decade, which described Asheville, ancient heart of the great Cherokee nation. Come walk in the footsteps of Hernando de Soto. I wrote a memo to the Chamber of Commerce to inform them that the Cherokees never lived in the Asheville area. Their eastern boundary was Soco Gap, and that Asheville was always occupied by Shawnee until white people lived there. They also ignored me. Two lessons learned about the reality of the history you read in the history books these days. But we'll begin our story in 1528 at the Panfilo de Narvaez expedition. Soon after landing near Tampa Bay, the Spaniards noticed local natives who were wearing gold ornaments. They asked the natives where the gold came from. Well, they didn't say it in English, but you know what I mean. The natives responded, Apalache. They made signs pointing to the north and indicated the Apalache temples were made of gold. The conquistadors instantly imagined themselves becoming fabulously rich like the men of Cortez who had recently conquered the Aztecs. The Indians meant the gold region of northern Georgia, which is the land of the kingdom of Appalachia, but the Spaniards thought they meant a much nearer province of natives, somewhat more advanced than those in Tampa Bay, who occupied much of the Florida panhandle. The Navarrese directed his conquistadors to head north. They found no gold in northern Florida, but still called these natives Apalache. Only 4 men survived the Navarrese expedition. It's an incredible story. They walked all the way to the Pacific Ocean before finding a group of Spanish slavers capturing Indians, and then were carried back to Mexico City as part of the crew of slaves. We then go to the infamous Hernando de Soto expedition, which began in 1539. Also after landing near Tampa Bay, the expedition meandered through the heart of northern Florida, then turned west. They soon encountered a village named Appalachian. The Spanish camped at the capital town, Anahaica. It's a Peruvian Arawak word which means elite place of. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Although they stayed among these people most of the winter, none of the Spanish ever thought of asking these people what they called themselves. As the Spanish were leaving Anahaica, they asked the locals where they might find gold. The natives responded there was much gold in Yupaha, 2 weeks' march to the north. That distance would put them in the southern end of the Georgia gold belt in west central Georgia, roughly in the area of Carrollton, which actually there were gold mines there in the 1800s. Yupaha was never mentioned again in their chronicles. A while back I discovered something that no one has seemed to notice. Both in the case of the De Soto and the Pardo expeditions, their native guides steered them well around the kingdom of Appalachia. I guess no one thought of that because none of these professors ever realized there was a major Native American civilization in northeast Georgia called Appalachia. But you can see right here on the map, in both cases, the natives made sure that none of the Spanish ever saw Appalachia. We'll get back to De Soto. He came up to the center of Georgia, roughly south of Macon, to Cheesy, and then he was steered to the northeast to another major province where the Ocote people live, which means water people. Until De Soto reached the provincial capital of Ocote, his conquistadors were headed straight for the province of Appalachia. A young man appeared out of the blue who persuaded him to head toward the sunrise, toward the city of Cofichachiqui, where he said there was much wealth. Where they're at is the Shoulder Bone Mounds near Sparta, Georgia. Ocote is just the Spanish spelling of a slightly different Creek word. Native guides took Captain Juan Pardo northward from the South Carolina coast to the North Carolina mountains when he had been ordered by the Viceroy to head southwestward to find the quickest route to Zacatecas, Mexico. Do we see a pattern happening here? Then in 1562, the word Appalachian appears on the first map. Here it is, right here, and exactly where it's supposed to be. There's no mention of Appalachia in Florida, see? It's only exactly where it's supposed to be. Diego Gutierrez was the royal cartographer for the King of Spain, so this is an official map. Then we go to 1566. This is the year after Fort Caroline was massacred and burned. We'll have another chapter of our program on Fort Caroline, but it was a French fort mainly occupied by French Huguenots that was established as the first step of France colonizing all of eastern North America. In 1566, Italian cartographer Paolo Forlini placed the Appalachians, or Appalachian in plural, correctly in the Georgia mountains and the 7 golden cities of Cibola in west central Georgia. Right here. There's Cibola, right at the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and Appalachian up in the mountains of North Georgia. where Florida natives had told Hernando de Soto Yupa was located. He also correctly placed Fort Carolyn at 35.5 degrees latitude at the mouth of the Altamaha River. This is where the French said Fort Carolyn was. Let me give you a hint. Where Fort Carolyn is shown now is not that latitude. But we'll get back to Fort Carolyn in part 3. In this 1578 map by Spanish royal geographer Geronimo Chavez, he did not even mention Appalachia or Appalachian at all, but he did put Fort Carolyn on the Seco, which was a Spanish name for the Altamaha River. There we go. It's hard to see here, but there's the fort. And it goes on up. They thought the two rivers here were connected, but it goes up into the mountains correctly. However, the map by Jacques Lemoyne, published in 1574, who was an artist and a map maker and who was one of the few survivors of the massacre at Fort Carolyn, correctly placed the real Appalachians in northern Georgia. A book by his English historian Richard Hakluyt in 1582 described a secret trade between the colonists at Santa Helena on Parris Island, South Carolina, and Appalachia in the Georgia mountains. The trade involved the exchange of European cloth and metal tools for gold and gems. Some traders were allowed by special permission to go to Kapal, which is the name of the town at the Track Rock Terrace complex. Here's a close-up of Lemoyne's map as it was printed by engraver Theodore de Bry in 1591. Again, Appalachia showing them living in the upper areas of the Chattahoochee River. This is Anaruba Falls. It says the Appalachian Mountains where one finds silver and gold. Appalachia is roughly north side Atlanta near Peachtree Creek. This is one of the most important aspects of colonial history in the Southeast that in recent years have been completely erased from the books available to people. Are you aware that in the late 1900s, geologists analyzed mine timbers and trees growing within the ruins of gold and silver and gem mines in Georgia and North Carolina? They obtained radiocarbon dates from 1585 to 1660 AD. Most of the wood was dated from 1585 to 1610. At the time I was living in Asheville, books on these discoveries were available in the Pack Library in Asheville. That's how I learned about it. I mean, it was commonly reported by the newspapers bragging about the Spaniards who were in North Carolina in the 15 and 1600s. Of all those books, though, the one by Foster Sonley is the only one still available in the Pack Library, which is the main library in Asheville. And they've disappeared from the bookshelves of all the other libraries in Western North Carolina. The reason is, if you have Spanish miners in 1585 and 1600 mining throughout Western North Carolina, North Georgia, it seems to be strong evidence that Cherokees were not there. And that's the thinking, I believe, behind the control of information to the public in North Carolina. Well, we don't want them being confused by the fact that actual history books written in the late 1900s conflict with what we're telling you now about our history. Then we have a discovery that you can go see if you call around this. I found this in April of 2010. I found an inscription carved in the boulder at Hooper's Gap in the Great Smoky Mountains that was in Ladino Spanish. The reason I knew it was Ladino, see, that's the Jewish word for prayer. Spanish used the word suplicación for prayer. So when they said Pri Darmos Casada, Septiembre 1615, that means they were Jewish. And they were Sephardic Jewish. Why would they be there? Why would they be at the top of the Smoky Mountains in 1615? Well, we look back into Spanish history. In 1610, hundreds, if not thousands, of Sephardic Jews in Cartagena, Colombia, had to flee on short notice when the Spanish Inquisition appeared without warning. History is silent as to where these families fled. We're still trying to find out ourselves at the People of One Fire. What we do know is that many of the wealthy Sephardic families in Colombia were heavily involved in the mining of gold, silver, and gems. Others had grown wealthy off the clandestine capture of indigenous American slaves. There were very few African slaves at that time, other than those captured off the coast of Morocco, who were not really from the same area that slaves later were captured. Cartagena was one of 3 cities in the Spanish Empire in which slave markets were permitted by the King of Spain. Royal officials in Latin America were bribed to look the other way when gangs of slaves appeared at mines and plantations. This French map, published in 1640, labels the southern highlands as the Montes Apalache, Appalachian Mountains, and the dominant native people of the region, the Appalachians. No word like Cherokee appears anywhere on this map, yet I can show you dozens of recently published archaeology books from southern universities that talk about the Cherokees occupying the southern highlands from 1600 on. Let's take a look closer so you know I'm not shooting you a line. In 1653, a planter from Barbados, Richard Brickstock, spent several months in North Georgia touring the lands of the Appalachia. The High King of Appalachia was inviting Europeans to settle in the northern edge of his realm, now southwestern Virginia and northeast Tennessee, as a buffer against the Rickahawkins of Virginia, who would later become some of the Cherokees. They're probably the core group. What had happened was that about that time, the colony of Virginia began arming the Rickahawkins with firearms, and the Rickahawkins are creating havoc throughout the southeast on slave raids. So the thinking of the High King was if he had Europeans on his northern realm armed with muskets themselves, the Rickahawkins would not penetrate into the heart of his kingdom. In a book published in 1658 by French ethnologist Charles de Rochefort, he included 2 fascinating chapters about the Appalachia. Their detailed information was based on the interviews with Brickstock. This is a very fanciful watercolor engraving of what the Nacoochee Valley looked like back in 1653. The mountains are oversized. This may be, I think, the large hill that looks like a mound that is east of the Nacoochee Mound, which we think later Ellen Adair lived on top of. Guess what? The Appalachia, as you see here, placed gold-colored mica on the stucco of their temples to protect them from being washed away by the rains. The stucco was mainly clay. And so, but they were not gold metal, they were gold mica. Charles de Rochefort's book was published in French, Dutch, English, German, and Italian, plus was republished 6 more times until 1701. Colonists in Carolina would have been very familiar with the book and the Appalachian Kingdom. His book is still today highly respected by European scholars, but unknown to most readers in the United States. This detail of one of the few Spanish-language 17th century maps of Florida. It denotes the names of a few missions, but does not label western Florida as being occupied by the Apalache Indians. However, the Apalachicola is labeled Apalache River. This is right here. By this time, all the missions in Georgia had been abandoned. Most of them were driven out by raids by English slave raiders and pirates. This is a section of the 1684 map by Jean-Baptiste de Vauquelin that reflects French exploration of the Chattahoochee and the Tennessee rivers, but no contact with the Appalachia. The map places the Appalachia far too south next to an oversized lake that was really a large expanse of wetlands adjoining the Lower Ocmulgee River. They would have been farther north. They were in the mountains. In 1646, the governor of La Florida Benito Ruzes Salazar de Valenzuela ordered construction of a pack mule trail which connected St. Augustine to the Nacoochee Valley in northeast Georgia. In the Nacoochee Valley, he built a fortified trading post, a small village, and possibly a mission, but we can find no record of it. Here's St. Augustine. This is the trail, and that is the Nacoochee Valley. In 1693, Governor James Moore of Carolina led a party of British soldiers on exploration of the lower Blue Ridge Mountains. He went north through what is now South Carolina and the edge of North Carolina, then looped back through what is Murphy, Carolina, and then, on the advice of some local Native Americans, ventured into the Nacoochee Valley. The soldiers were shocked to see many Spanish people there. You can see here the smoke rising from the gold smelters. They realized they're vastly outnumbered, and at the time, England was at war with Spain, so they beat a hasty retreat and headed back to the coast of South Carolina. The interesting thing was that all those Spanish settlements in the Nacoochee Valley disappeared very soon, and they no longer appear on the map, which makes me strongly suspect that Moore secretly ordered a raid against them with his Indian allies, but this is not recorded in history. This is the last map to mention Appalachia. It's by Robert Morton. Here you can see Appalachia right there. The location is roughly Salty Nacoochee and the Kennemere Mound in the Nacoochee Valley. This map is widely available, and any PhD, any professor in Georgia or North Carolina could easily get on the web and see it. It's not a great secret. It's probably the best known map I have. Yet, these same professors will say repeatedly, well, the Cherokees arrived in Georgia around 1600 AD or earlier. This is one of the many things they're frustrated with. They ignore the maps. Here's a 1701 map by Guillaume de Lisle. It's a map of Louisiana and Mexico. Notice Pays de Chauny, that's land or nation of the Shawnee. That is western North Carolina. Immediately to the west in northwest Georgia and southeast Tennessee, he has Les Villages de Cahuitas. The Cahuitas was the French name for the creeks. So he showed Creek Indians living in southeastern Tennessee at that time in 1701. Along the Little Tennessee River is predominantly Village de Chauny, or French word for Shawnee. Downstream, Casquinampo, that's their word for the Coasati, which the word means many warriors in Coasati. Below them, the Congaria, which is the Toga Yuchi, and below them, the Chickasaw. No mention anywhere of Cherokees. Now this is tribe up here, the Teo-Non-Ta-Teka-Ga, were in southern West Virginia, and in southern Virginia, they lived, according to this French inscription here, they lived in caves. This, I strongly suspect, are some of the ancestors of the Cherokees, but notice they're not even in North Carolina. The reason I say that is that the Creeks are about the only tribe in the southeastern United States that do not use a word for Cherokees that means cave dwellers. All of the other major tribes, the translation in English is cave dwellers, which makes us suspect that one time they did live in caves. This is the 1717 map by the same gentleman, Guillaume de Lisle. Appalachia is gone. And instead, he shows Les Cherokees. This is the first European map to mention the Cherokees, 1717. There was a hand-drawn map in South Carolina from 1715 that mentioned the Cherokees. But in both maps, they're shown to live only in northeastern Tennessee, above the area where Knoxville is today, and then in a small area here at the headwaters of the Savannah River. Even at this time, the area from the Little Tennessee Valley southward was occupied by Yuchi and by Creeks. These are all Yuchi and Creek towns. This is the John Sinix map from 1721. It's an official map of the British Crown. It has the Cherokees occupying northeastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, and extreme northwestern tip of South Carolina. So obviously between 1717 and 1721 had been a great expansion of Cherokee territory. Most of North Georgia is occupied by branches of the Creek Indians. He shows a small pocket right on the edge, just on the tip, right there, of Georgia. He shows the ruins of Fort Carolyn were on the south side of the May River. Right here, he calls the Altamaha River the Coweta or May River. This is very important information that we'll discuss in more detail in part 3. But as many as you know, there's May, you can see it right there. If you go to Florida, everybody says, every sign, every textbook, every history book says that the original name of the St. Johns River is the May River. Here you can see a map from 1721 that labels the Altamaha River as the May River and also shows the location of Fort Caroline on the south side of the Altamaha River. This is the 1722 map by Colonel William or John Barnwell. Here we see North Georgia. He leaves the center of North Georgia blank. This is the mountains. There are no Cherokee villages in the Coochie Valley. He shows Creek villages on the west side of the Tugaloo River. He shows Upper Creek villages in northwest Georgia. But there's another little surprise on this map. Let's get down here. He changed the name of the Altamaha. It had been May River for centuries since the French had arrived. For unknown reasons, but we can guess, Barnwell changed the name to Altamaha. This is one of the very important cases where history was instantly changed and no one noticed. So how could Fort Caroline on the Atlantic coast have anything to do with the naming of the Appalachian Mountains or by the explanation of its etymology? You will learn that in part 3. We'll see you there.